Hello and welcome to Tuesday. Here we are, another day of devotions. We're continuing on in the book of Hosea, and we're digging down into some things we need to meditate upon as we hear God's words to Hosea, through Hosea, and even resonating through his life as he is getting to live out and walk out this idea of God's relationship with his people, the nation of Israel, his relationship with the people of Israel that are in the southern kingdom and in Jerusalem, and hearing the complaints of God and actually seeing it played out. Hosea is playing the part of God. In that sense, it's not in judgment, but he's walking out God's role, God's position, and trying to share God's point of view through the very everyday living of his life. It's what a living parable, and it's a tough one. It is a tough one because Hosea, as we've discovered so far, has married a woman known as a prostitute. His firstborn son is his. His firstborn daughter and secondborn son belong to some other man. And now, this is the background for informing the people of Israel with this family as a living parable. Talk about dysfunction. So God is using this dysfunctional relationship and this dysfunctional family to tell the story of Israel and Judah's dysfunction because they've departed from their God, Yahweh. So, with that, we continue on with Hosea chapter 2, verse 13, where God says, I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. So this is the idea of taking somebody to the woodshed or to the principal's office. When I was a kid, it just never was a good thing to have the secretary use the speaker in the room where you were seated and inform the teacher in front of the whole class to have you sent down to the office. Most of the time, most every time that a student was called down to the office, it was for discipline. There were a few times there were exceptions. One was that a parent had to come pick them up for an unexpected event, or there was some sort of commendation that needed to be given to a student. But most of the time, it seemed like most of the time, that if the speaker crackled in the room and the secretary asked for you to be sent to the office, this was going to be a problem. You were going to get some concentrated attention from the principal. And so this is the imagery here. We see it in terms of punishment, and that word there is the idea of punishment, but it's coming aside into a place where you get focused attention for the purpose of reforming you or turning around your behavior. So there is a whole lot of mercy also being woven into this. And the reason is because Israel has spent time burning incense to the Baals. Now I want us to notice another thing, that there are multiple gods that they're worshiping. Remember, the Lord your God is one, is the Shema of Israel. What have they been doing? They have been adopting Canaanitish practices. Now, there's two levels I want to look at this. And one level is, amongst pagans, they tend to develop regional gods or goddesses and focus only upon the god or goddess of that region and be in complete obedience to that god or goddess in that region. So amongst the Israelites, depending where they lived, is the style of the Baal that they worshipped. So think about that. They tended to adopt the practices of the local Canaanitish people that were not driven out, and they developed an affinity for the local god or goddess or god or goddesses, gods or goddesses, I meant to say. So that's one level of this idolatry. And so many of us sit here today and say, well, I'm a believer. I don't do this. I don't practice idolatry. And so we need to hear Hosea, though he is first of all speaking to the Jewish people and their idolatry with the Baals. We need to hear it today that he is speaking to us in our Christian forms of idolatry. You might be sitting there saying, Christian forms of idolatry? Yes, I'm going to suggest that what we do is we actually find things about God that we like and are most like us, and things that we can most identify with, and that is the place that we go, and we go no further. And what we do is we say, I want this much about God, and I don't need anything else. And so we become very narrow in our practices, and I'm talking about what we reject from Scripture and what we accept from Scripture. And we develop our own unique forms of how God is. We think we have him figured out. And so what we do is that we don't receive him in his fullness, and we tend to pick and choose on him. And so there's two layers that are going on at the same time here. It is the person who has walked away from the Lord, grown cold towards the Lord, and is indulging in the world system. But there is also the sense of needing a new revelation of the nature of God and needing to turn to God in an area of our life where we've never turned to him before. And in other ways, returning to God in our life where we may have grown cold or have lost fellowship or connection with him or lost intimacy. So this is the idea of pulling Israel out to God himself and get them refocused. And what she had done is that she had gone after her lovers, he says, but me she forgot. They had become so engaged in their idolatry that they missed out completely and had eventually completely lost from their life any worship of Yahweh. Now, remember that the northern kingdom started with golden calves that were named Yahweh, and they went into total witchcraft and idolatry. The southern kingdom has Jerusalem in the priesthood and is still functioning, and yet she is making sacred raisin cakes and worshiping the Queen of Heaven and looking at the constellations and the stars, and she is buying into Canaanitish religion and worldly interpretations of how things actually are, and she has forgotten. Even the southern kingdom has forgotten the Lord, Yahweh, her God. And this is the declaration of the Lord. So now here's what he says. Therefore, I am now going to allure her. She has been alluring. She has clothed herself a certain way to make herself acceptable to her gods. She has also been allured and drawn away by false gods. And we can't leave out the idea of demonism, of unclean spirits and fallen angels, and that whole thing. So she has been pictured now as being allured and being alluring, making herself alluring to the false gods and adapting herself to the systems, but she's also gone after them and has been drawn after them. So he says, he uses that same terminology, the Lord does. I'm going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Well, here we have again that sense of mercy, that sense of restoring. Because if it was just a punishment, he would take her into the wilderness and throw her into a tar pit or rain down brimstone upon her. But that's not what he's doing. He's saying, I'm going to get her attention. I'm going to pull her out into the wilderness again, and we're going to go back to square one, and I'm going to speak tenderly to her. I'm going to get her heart's attention once again. So here's the meditation for today. Where is it as we're turning towards the Lord or returning to the Lord, as we look at our life, is the Lord maybe brought us out into the wilderness? Where has He brought us into a time or a situation where we need to be more dependent upon Him? We need to see this as a hopeful and positive thing, because this is what He's doing. He's calling us to the principal's office, but it's not merely for the purpose of administering some lashes or some stern words, but it's to reconnect us once again with His heart for us. We've forgotten that He loves us and we love Him. So this is what's going on in Hosea's life, and this is what's being set up for the people of Israel. And I want us to think about today, this is our meditation, where is God setting me up, not only for a stern talking to, but for a great return to Him, and a restoration, or a revelation of Himself that I've never had before. So with that, I want to say, have a great day on this Tuesday as you think about that. Lord's grace be upon you and His peace. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.